Ray Piepenbrink is my name and Crete history is my game. Today is October 27th, 1988, and we're with the Historical Society at the AMVET building, and tonight is Hans Clausen night when we're going to talk about our former police chief, Hans Clausen.
I'd like to bid you all a good evening. My name is Ann Percon. I'm the president of the Crete Area Historical Society this year. And the purpose of our program tonight is to honor a man who was law and order in Crete and the Crete area for a very long time. Hans Clausen was just synonymous with keeping everything upright, being very good, or you got to hear about it, or your parents got to hear about it. He was quite a man, and we have some photographs this evening. We have Mr. Piepenbrink, who is going to head our discussion. We'd like to involve as many of you as possible because we know there are some very good stories that everyone has to tell. Almost everybody has a Hans story. We would like to welcome two very important guests this evening, Mrs. Warren Clausen and Mrs. Willard Clausen. Both these ladies are daughter-in-laws of Hans Clausen, and we're so very glad that you could come and be with us this evening. We'd also like to thank the Seehausen Certified store. If many of you get the South Suburban Marketer, they have a lovely ad for us about tonight's program, and we appreciate that very, very much. The Historical Society meets here at the AMVET building generally on the fourth Thursday of the month. Our membership is fairly small, but very, very varied and interesting, and we have some really good meetings. We'd like to encourage those of you who do not belong to the Society to join. Dues are $5 a year. It's a bargain. And we would also like to explain to you that the purpose of the Historical Society is to maintain and gather historical documents, historical objects, and to continue to push local history in the Crete area. One of our projects is to help the fourth grade schools in 201U district to appreciate local history. And the fourth grade classes have a unit on that every year, and this next week I will be taking the classes on walks around Crete, pointing out places of interest. We use our book with the children because there are lots of good photographs. There are many buildings that aren't there anymore, and it's very difficult for these kids to visualize huge structures that stood 2- and 3-story buildings. It's very entertaining. My first walk with the children is tomorrow morning at 9:30, and we leave from the elementary school here in Crete. So if any of you would like to join us in the morning, you'd be most welcome. At this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Mr. Piepenbrink and listen to some of his wonderful stories about Mr. Clausen. Thank you.
Ray Piepenbrink is my name and Crete history is my game. This evening we're going to talk about Hans Clausen. Picture up here of Hans, a big picture with smaller pictures laying on the table. The Crete Pictorial History has additional pictures in it. If you don't have a history book, why, feel free to buy one tonight. Only $20. The badge I'm wearing is one that Hans Clausen wore before he became chief. It was found in Garrett, Indiana by Hans's sister in the back of a sewing machine. She gave it to Herman Dietrich, who gave it to Ed Bruns, who gave it to me. The smaller badge is one worn by Fred Schultz. He assisted Hans Clausen on an occasion or so. Hans Clausen was born January 8th, 1888, 100 years ago this year. And he died September 3rd, 1952. He got to be 64 years, 7 months, and 25 days. Hans became a special policeman at the age of 19. His starting pay was $60 a month. Now apparently Hans Clausen and his wife met when both of their parents were co-proprietors of Colstead and Clausen Dixie Highway Hotel, which was located up here on the corner where Ritter's Tavern was, Nieberger's, the original Woods Hotel. Mrs. Clausen's maiden name was Colstead, and her grandparents' name was Bonezuck, which translated to English means beanbag. Hans was a policeman for 43 years. And by the way, nobody ever called him Chief Clausen or Mr. Clausen or Officer Clausen. Everybody knew him as Hans. Hans was a detective on the CNEI Railroad for a couple of years. Hans also worked for Fred Zoller, who was a coal dealer, and on hauling and other drayage. Hans hauled coal with horse and wagon. And Hans also drove a horse-pulled bus to Steger for persons working at the Steger Piano Manufacturing Company. Hans was also a horse and buggy chauffeur for Dr. Charles Blim. Now, Dr. Blim had calls day and night, and sometimes needed a chauffeur to haul him from here to there. After he got there, the horse would always find his way home, but he couldn't tell the horse to go so-and-so, so he had to have a chauffeur to drive him there. Hans became hard of hearing because he had measles and mumps, according to Mrs. Clausen's remarks. Hans was not only a policeman, but also took care of the filter bed, waterworks, meter reader, and any other general duty that the village had. And he always used his own car. He didn't have a squad car then. In 1922, Hans's wages were $125 a month. Some people make more than that in one day now. They just think Hans worked 24 hours a day. I'd like to read a letter that Hans got from a person in Steger. This was several years after the Gus Crockett incident in the bank. And you old-timers all heard of Gus Crockett and his dealings. Well, this particular letter was sent to Hans from Steger, Illinois, April 27, 1923. And it's signed by Eclops Clanny. Surely a fictitious name. The letter goes like this. Well, to start off with, the spelling in this letter is awful, and the punctuation is even worse. Hans Clausen, Crete, Illinois. Dear Hans, there are things going on around Crete, and no one has it in for you. Some people who lost all their savings in the Crete Bank long time ago are not going to wait any longer for the law and are going to take the law in their own hands. The officers and directors of the bank are going to get theirs, T-H-E-R-S. And your game is to keep hands off. You can perform your duties and still not butt into something, B-U-T, into something that doesn't concern you. Talk it over with them if you want to, but don't get in there, they're on their side if you know what's good for you. Yours truly, Eclops Clan. A few stories to start off with before I ask you to tell your stories. I got this directly from Willard Clausen the other day. And by the way, Willard Clausen says hello to everybody. Mrs. Clausen is here tonight, both Mrs. Willard and Mrs. Warren. At one time, Hans noticed that the syndicate was in town and placing slot machines in the businesses. He started off at Krebs up here, went down the west side of the road, and came back down the east side of the road. So when Hans found out about it, why, he went in the businesses and took the slot machines and set them out on the curb. So when the syndicate guys came back on the east side of the street, They wanted to know what's going on here. Hans says, I want these slot machines out of here. And I don't want them back. The next time I see them back, I'm putting a sledgehammer to them. And they never came back. Hans quite often was confronted with drunk drivers. So we pull them over to the side of the road, take the distributor cap off their motor, engine, and tell them to sleep it off, and in the morning where they could put their distributor cap on and keep going. He didn't do that with everybody there, though. There was one time that Congressman Coots came through Crete, and he was drunk, and he ran into a utility pole. So Hans walked over to him, and the congressman says, I'm Congressman Coots, you can't arrest me. Hans kept it walking. He says, I'm Congressman Coots, you can't arrest me. Hans reached in the car and grabbed him by the back of the neck, lifted him out of the car and walked him down to the lockup. One time Hans was in the barber shop getting a shave from Harry Voigt's, and some guy stood near him and was getting under Hans's skin. Kept talking all the time, so finally Hans told Harry Voigt's, just wait a minute. And he raised up in the barber chair and reached over and grabbed this guy by the shirt and lifted him onto this side of the chair and told him to shut up. The way I remember Hans mostly is when he directed traffic during the racing season. I used to sell daily newspapers. We'd walk up and down between the cars and sell these newspapers before these hawkers out there at the Lincoln Fields racetrack could get to them. And there's one incident that happened while Hans was directing traffic, and I'm going to let Ed Newton tell about that.
That particular instance, the kids, of which I was at the time, 10, 11 years old, would sit there on the corner and watch Hans direct traffic. He'd pull up there on his motorcycle with all the authority in the world, get out, and he'd lumber up to the center of the road, or he'd pull the switch on a stoplight, shut it off. He'd get out there directing traffic. And of course, then we had two lanes. There was nothing fancy about roadway at the time. And Hans, as you said, he didn't have too much good faith with the colored people. But he had the traffic coming through, and he turned his back, stopped the traffic from the north, turns around, guys from the west to come on. About that time, an old Chevy, mechanical brakes, I assume. He had his hand up to him. This car put the brakes on, but didn't quite make it. And as Hans was standing there, that bumper hit him right behind the knees, and he just sat right down on that bumper. He stopped all the traffic. He walked over to that car. You, over here. Side of the road. Give me the keys. Went back out there and started directing traffic. About 4:30, when the traffic started coming back from the racetrack, Hans went over and said, here's your keys, now get out of here. That was just the way he treated the incident.
Okay, who's got another one? Okay.
Tony and I were in Ace Hardware the other day, and somehow or another came up with a story, for the program tonight. And as Johnny Sylvan was in there, and he kept on, and he said, well, I have an incident, he said, with Hans. He said, one day he and his wife were coming, he said, down Route 1, and there's a hitchhiker. So they stopped and picked the hitchhiker up. And they're driving along, and the guy comes with a gun in his back. So John thought to him, so what am I going to do? So he steps on the gas. He comes through Crete. He's racing through Crete, maybe 45 miles an hour. But anyway, he's racing through Crete, and Hans takes after him. So here goes John, you know, this guy's got the gun, and he said to this man, oh, this man said, you better stop him, you know, shoot. He said, what if you do? He says, we're all gonna go. So we kept going and going. He got to Chicago Heights to the police station, and he said, evidently, someone must have called that, you know, this man's racing through staggering Crete and everything. So we got to the Chicago Heights police station, and 2, 3 of the policemen come out, you know, and they get this guy. They take him, got him on the car, you know, give him Hans, you know, up to this Johnny, hands him, writes out a ticket for him, charge him $3.50 for speeding through Crete. He said, oh, kill him, but he has to be on a ticket.
I just told us that story the other day.
Still been doing it.
You notice on Hans over here, he's got an expandable band around the front of his cap. Now, when he went to chase somebody on a motorcycle, he'd pull that expandable band out and stretch it underneath his chin, keep his hat on. There he goes. Okay, who's got another one? Tony?
We all remember seeing old Hans, you know, standing like this by the street, you know, and directing traffic, and he's always big and heavy. So this scene, I picked it up out of Esquire magazine. This goes back quite a while ago. Anyway, this guy, I said, had to come through Crete and saw Hans directing traffic because this picture was painted. Well, painted was in colors. It was the size of the Esquire magazine, which was pretty good those days. Anyway, there's a picture of Hans with a hearing aid that they put, you know, had on him, and they were real crude. Remember, you know, years ago, they weren't like the new ones. Anyway, it hung out, this wire come around this way, and then went to the ear some way. So, a little kid, had snuck up behind Hans while he was directing traffic, and had a pair of snips like the big shears, you know, it must have been that long. And this little fellow was standing behind Hans, cutting this wire that was going to the hearing aid. And I said somebody had to go by and saw Hans and just painted this picture, I guess. Maybe it never happened, but it really was cute. And I gave it to Hans, and I wish I'd made a copy of it myself. Hans got the last one I had.
One time, Hans had stopped the traffic during the racetrack, and there's a couple of guys there. They said they were deputy sheriffs, and they didn't think Hans had any business delaying them. So Hans says, "Let's see your badge." He said, "Lay it in my hand here." So they both laid their badge in Hans's hand, and he took them and threw them up against the bowling alley building. Get going. Next. Winnie.
I think we're missing part of Hans's most historic history. He didn't only direct traffic, he was a disciplinarian. Why, there's only one person in this world I can remember that we had more respect for than Hans, or as much, and that was Vern Crackle. But Hans always, we knew he meant business. So at Halloween time, we used to do things, you think kids do bad things now. We used to do some things that weren't so great either. In this particular Halloween, a bunch of them about my age, I think I was 10 or 12, we decided we liked purple grapes. So we knew Mr. Reese. He lived down there where Bobby Cannon lives, next door. I think Nia and Jim Schaefer live in his house. We went down and were swiping grapes off of the grape arbor, and somebody had evidently done it ahead of us, so Mr. Reese was laying for us. And so was Hans. So he came after us, and we took off on the run with Hans after us. And that guy could get around. He was heavy, but he chased us on foot. Well, we made it home, and we're safe. We made it home. Up the front porch in the door. Right away, everybody knew we'd done something wrong. Turn around, here's Hans. He came right in that front door, and we thought, oh, what do we do now? Everybody, there were not just the young kids, there were more. Out the back door with Hans after us. I was laughing by now. My mother and dad don't know what we've done, but they know it was pretty bad. So finally, we all got caught and brought back in and had to stay in, and no more Halloweens. And Hans thought, I think he thought that was funnier than it was serious, because he went right to that house after us. So there was no getting away from Hans, I'll tell you that.
Right. Okay. Probably what happened is we had dumped the outhouse just before you got there.
They're talking about Hans being a disciplinarian. Well, someone called me the other day, said they couldn't make the meeting tonight, but pointed out that their son was one of a number of children playing in the Crete Park, and had just broken the window in the Park Hall with a rock, and Hans happened on that. So we took all these kids and piled them in his car and drove off to the police station, showed them the police station, and told them the importance of not throwing rocks, and then let them go. This lady says her son remembers that to this day. Who's next?
Ray, I can relate one other thing to you. You talk about Hans being strong. I saw him pick up Gus Weber by the back of the neck right off the ground. But back then, we used to have sirens on our bicycle. You'd pull the chain, it would go down, hit the wheel, and well, Hans was death on it. And if he saw the bicycle, he waited till you come to get your bike, and he got you. When he put that vice grip on you, you knew you'd been had.
You know, one of the important things that was stressed to me was the 9 o'clock curfew when the fire whistle blew. And wherever I was, barefoot or whatever, boy, I'd make it home, because you wouldn't be hanging around the streets after 9 o'clock. So one day, Bill Henricks, I'd run past his place all the time, and he asked a neighbor, did you ever see Piepenbrink run home when the curfew blows? The guy said, no, I never seen him. Well, Hans says, you ought to see him. All you can see is the bottom of his feet and sparks flying off his toenails. Okay.
I saw Hans in action 4 or 5 times, I think, in my lifetime. The first time I ever saw him, I was about 11 or 12, and worked at the Lincolnshire Country Club in the locker room. And Hans would go over there at night, about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and he would escort the fellow with the money to the office safe. I suppose they gave him a drink or something for it. But anyway, this one particular day, there was a big bruiser standing in the doorway. He's about 6'5", and fills the whole doorway. And he says, Hans says, move over, the bar's closed. I said, hey, no little pipsqueak of a cop like he's going to tell me what to do. Doesn't say a word. He just reaches in his back pocket, clunk. Didn't even look back. Stepped right on over. And so a couple of years later, my dad had a tavern in Stager. And the second time we saw Hans, he was over there eating hot peppers. And all the Italians and the Germans, they would bring all the ethnic food to the tavern. And Hans loved these hot peppers. So he's reaching behind the bar and he's putting them on this piece of bread. He's pouring the oil on there. And my dad said, hey, Hans, those are pretty hot. You better lay off of that. Nothing's too hot for me. So he's eating this thing and the tears are streaming out. But he wouldn't admit it. So the next day he was in the hospital. They were pumping his stomach. Okay, so a few years go by and I get married and I'm living over here in Janeski's house behind Seahausen. And Betty and I are in bed there one night and it's about midnight, hotter than Hades. Pretty soon there's a voice coming out. Help! Help! Please, somebody help me! And this goes on for about an hour. So the jail was over where the drugstore was now. So anyway, I call up Hans. And I said, hey, Hans, what's with this guy over there? He's hollering for help and hollering for the water. He says, is he keeping you awake? I said, yeah, he's keeping me awake. So he said, I'll take care of it. So then things quiet down. So the next day I see Hans uptown and I said, Hans, what happened with him? Well, he said he wanted some. He was drunk and I locked him up. He said, I gave him a pitcher of water. He says, and he threw it at me. He says he could die of thirst. He'll never get it. But the one story, I've told it at my shop a couple of times, I've never told it too often, but a little on the opposite side. But I was out in the Crete Park. Now, I don't know what I was doing there at the time, but Hans drove up in his car alongside the tracks. And he gets out and he walks there, and then I see there's a man laying down alongside the tracks, like this. So I walk, I thought he got hit by a train, so I walk over there, and this guy says, I ain't gonna move. You can kill me, I'm not gonna move. Evidently, Hunts was trying to run about town. So Hunts looks all around, looking in sight. He pulls out his you-know-what and proceeds to urinate on it. Not too tall. And he says, I'm going to be back in about 20 minutes. If I don't see your butt halfway to Stager, so help me, I'm going to crap all over. Those are fond memories of us.
Chuck Pease, you got a story, haven't you?
Oh, no. This is very high job. When his little Gage got married, we all had a shivery. Chuck will probably remember that. Mr. Crackle walked out on the porch and somebody clobbered him with a tomato. Well, they called Hot. Here comes Hot. Everybody had sense enough to run with me. I got in the shadow of a tree. So Hot called me up, grabbed me, shook me up real good. He really shook me up. He said, I got you something up for Grover. When we go home, he'll take care of you. So he told my dad I got a good one. I got grounded for a week. The next day, Hot comes knocking on the door. I said, what did I do now? He said, nothing. I come to apologize. I caught the guy who got the me. Then another time, he caught Tony Reggie and my cousin shoved me in the window. Thanks. We were out on the town. It was pretty late in the morning. He didn't say nothing. He just stood there and watched Tony Reggie and Junior Jacobs shoved me in the window. Good thing my father wasn't home that night.
Good thing your mother didn't say.
I got a little story.
Okay, Jim.
He liked to party too. Not to the beer drink. I love you people who listen to that. One, my parents used to take us to California every other year. One year we went out there and my brother Ralph stayed home. And we got home about 4 days early. We walked in the house. There's a wash tub full of spaghetti going on the floor burners on the stove. I guess they were going to have a party or something. Anyway, we told Hans before we left, or my dad did, that if there's a party over at Adams' house, I want you to break it up. And here we go in the front room, and he's sitting there drinking beer with
Well, I'd like to say something in a little different vein.
Okay, this is Mrs. Willard Clausen.
He was a very good father-in-law. I don't think I could have had a better father-in-law. And even better grandfather. He used to come almost every Sunday, or Monday if he couldn't make it on a Sunday. And he'd always read the comics to the kids. I mean, no matter how many there were, because we did have quite a few. He read the comics to them, I think, almost every week. He very seldom missed. And, well, I think all my kids that knew him really loved him. And my one boy, the day he died, he was, or not the day he died, the day he was buried, was 1 year old. And his grandfather had always wanted his eyes to be brown. Well, he had had blue eyes. But that night, after the funeral, we stopped at my grandfather's. You might know where, but there was a gas station out of the Wider going into Dyer. Well, he ran that gas station at that time. And we stopped there, and he was playing with him. And he said, my God, Sarah, this boy's eyes are blue, or brown. And I said, no, they're blue. He said, no, they're brown. And we went over and looked, both Dad and I, and they were brown. The day of his funeral, his eyes had turned brown. He had wanted it so bad, I guess. That day, he turned brown. And I have a picture of the kids, and then I have one of my husband and the boys with me, if anybody would care to see them. This is all of our children. You see Johnny is bald here. It was Memorial Day last year. It was our goodbye to Johnny, more or less. We didn't know it was going to be a goodbye to Donna, too. because 5 weeks later Donna was dead and Johnny was still alive. They both died though of cancer. Donna's the one who died. I mean, Donna and Johnny had been in Crete quite a bit, so I mean, some of you probably knew both of them. And Junior was supposed to be here tonight, but he hasn't gotten here so far. And I've got another picture here that I wanted to show. Our new Hans Clausen, the middle one here, is our new Hans Clausen. This is Michael Jr. and this is Johnny Jr., John Wayne Jr. He's named after his uncle, and this is named after his dad. But this is Hans Clausen. Named after his great-grandfather. He's just 3 years old. And then here's a picture. It's a small one, so it's a picture of my husband and just the boys, I believe. Yeah. I don't suppose you can see them very well, but and then Junior's kids. Here's the new one. And that's his other 6 girls. He's got 7 girls, where I had boys, mostly boys. But he was a very good grandfather to all of them, and I sure wish he'd have been around to be a good grandfather. I'm sure he couldn't have been any better of a great grandfather than he was a grandfather and a father-in-law.
Thank you. Mrs. Clausen, can you tell us anything about Willard's health?
Well, he's had 3 heart attacks, and he has arthritis. The arthritis has ate the insides of his knees so bad that he can't stand up or walk. He'll be 3 years steadfast the Friday before Thanksgiving. Otherwise, he's in fairly good health. We're moving to Florida this next month. We have 5 boys down there. They have a moving business in Clearwater, and he's going to, even though he can't walk, he's going to work for them. He's going to answer telephone for them. They think that'll be a good idea for him and for them too. And we feel it'll be better for his health because when we lived down there before, we only lived down there a short time, he was better in all ways. I mean, he couldn't walk much then, but he could get around. It was hard for him, but he could get around. So we're hoping that things will be better once we move down there again. Oh, and by the way, I have his leg irons that he used to have years ago. I don't know how he used them, but I mean, I know he had them. When we get to Florida, I'm going to donate them in his name to the police museum down there. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but there is a police museum down there on 19. I think it's near Naples. I'm not sure just which town it is.
Port Charlotte.
What?
Port Charlotte.
Charlotte?
Port Charlotte.
Well, I knew it was down there because
Right
we
on
went
the
past
Canyon
it.
Trail.
And we went in, my mother and I went in. There was so many things in there, but I want to donate something in his name, and that'd be the only thing my husband has of his. The leg iron and the key. I mean, he's got the works. Otherwise, I couldn't really do it. So that will be donated in his name to the police museum.
Okay, thank you. One of the ladies that used to know Hutz well was Mrs. Milton, and she said that often she had to come home on the midnight train on the CNI, and Hans would be there to see that the passengers got off the train safely and got away from the station in good order. Mrs. Guys? Mrs. Guys was formerly Mrs. Howard, and Hans worked for her dad.
Well, as you mentioned, he worked for my dad when I was a very little girl. And then when he became policeman, I remained one of his favorites. I think one of his favorite little friends. And he had a big white, fat bulldogs that produce puppies probably every 6 months or so. And I would get when I was puppies. Well, I think my folks managed to get rid of them somehow, but every time the mother would have puppies, I would get one. And I had a friend who lived right across from the police station, whom I would visit, and then I would see to it that at 8 o'clock, when the curfew was to be run, I would be there, and he would let me pull the rope. And then when I became older, so I'm not taking too much time, I married and had a little baby, and I was coming home from Beechers, and I had my little baby in a basket, and I wanted to stop at my mother's, who lived, right on the main street there, and just run in and tell her something. So I parked on the wrong side of the road, left the motor running and the baby in the car, and just went in for, just probably 5 minutes. And when I came out, the car was gone. And I was just about, so anyway, I was very nervous. All of a sudden I saw Hans standing across the street, and he motioned to me to come, and I realized that my car was over there. He said, "Is this your car?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought you would know better than to park on the wrong side of the street, leave your baby in the car with the motor running, and go in and see your mother." But it taught me a lesson. But I have such fond memories, and I remember after every funeral in our church, he would be parked to direct traffic, and he was buried from our church. And in the minister's sermon, he remarked that we were now honoring the man who so often had parked up the end of Main Street to direct the traffic for all the funerals from our church. And we really felt it was a great tribute to him.
Mrs. Guys, off the subject a little bit, but I understand that your house on Main Street used to be haunted.
I didn't know that.
You better ask Lenore then.
Where Ed Rennie had his saloon, upstairs there were many bedrooms. I think there were about,
Excuse me, Ed Rennie's saloon was up here where Chuck's place is.
yeah. And really that place was haunted. Because I was there, I slept there one night with Mildred, and I heard something real funny. I'll tell you a story too. Adeline and I were coming home from Senholz's, I think, Adeline Senholz. And I think we had a little Ford coupe. And we were coming and going to turn in our driveway, so we weren't going fast. And all of a sudden, here Hans comes from the side street and hits us and spins the car around. And my brother Herb heard it, and he came out and he said, "Drive the damn junk home." And it was Hans. And he said, "Oh, it's you." He came from the side street, and we had the right of way.
Okay, who's got another one?
Right? You talk about Hans being police chief. He was a whole police force in Crete. He knew every water and sewer connection. If somebody was building a new house, he knew just where the tap was for the sewer. He could just pinpoint it. He was also the dog catcher for Crete. The village, my Uncle George Johnson, who was trustee at that time, was telling me the story. The village enacted an ordinance for dog licensing, and they decided that the female dogs would be $2 and the males were $1. And they told Hans he was supposed to enforce that. And Hans came back to the trustees and told them, I'll be GD if I'm getting down on my hands and knees and go down and see what sex it is.
Oh, that calls for another one.
Ray, when we were kids, we lived where I live now, right across from the village office, and of course that was for a long time the building in Crete. It was a police station, a well house, a fire station, and you did it there or you didn't do it in Crete. And some of you will remember, and if there were young people here, they think I'd lost all my buttons, but I haven't. We didn't have electricity stuff that ran everything. Hans stood in that little old well house that was about 4 foot square with a hand pump every other day and pumped the water from the well up into the big water tower that they tore down a few years ago. And that was a hard job because at home we had a cistern and we were pumping water from the cistern into a tank up in the attic that came down by centrifugal force, so we had soft water. But anyhow, on a hot day and we were off fussing around, Mom would be calling at it. He'd come around the door and he'd say, Mrs. Helm, put the old clothes on those kids. And we put our old clothes on and Hans would get out there and he'd pump that water tank so full it would run over. And we could play in the water that ran over from the water now. You don't think he was a humanitarian and a fine person. There's no way you can show your respect for a guy like Hans, because if he had an enemy, that guy was wrong. It wasn't Hans.
As more than once, when I was courting Marion, I missed that last bus on Faithorn Road, and he'd taken me home twice and wouldn't take a penny for it to South Heights. He said, Tony, come on, I'll take you home. Never accepted a penny.
And when he and his friends came to Crete, when he and his friends came to Crete, they made sure they slowed down to Crete because his Hans was out.
There's one other time I got a liquor from Ohio. Wasn't my fault. All the week come around, and he told me twice to go home. Every time I told him I was going home. He had a card party over at school. So he wanted to know where my dad and mother was. I told him the card party. So the third time, he caught me, he said, I told you to go to school. I said, that's where I'm going. He said, you're going the wrong way. He said, I'll take you home, you get ready, and I'll take you to school. So my mother had a coconut cream cake baked for the church. Sitting on the kitchen table, Hans comes in, I get ready, Hans is sitting at the table with a big cut of cake out. My mother comes home, she said, I told you not to cut the cake. I said, I didn't cut it. You did. I wouldn't tell her. I said, tell your mother she bakes good cake. He also said that if I'm going to chase you guys around tonight, some parents are going to have to feed you. He was a character.
Right? One time, it was around Halloween night, and a bunch of us guys got together, and it was Hubie Buchanan and my brother Harold and I and somebody else, I don't know, but we used to go over to the Lutheran school, and right where the gym wall was the main switch box. And we used to go there and trip that switch box and then run out when they were having a party, and they were having a party or something there that night. We pulled that switch box, all run out the front, and I fell down the front steps, and I rolled under a car. And the other two kids, or three kids, they ran like heck. I don't know where they went, but I was under that car, and I was breathing like a steam. Hans come up, he says, I know you're under there. Come out of there. And well, I lay there for an hour. Finally he walked away. He wasn't about to bend down. Boy, I was scared that night.
One other story, with a racetrack out here, you probably have heard, we have the off-track betting parlors now. Well, Crete had one a number of years ago behind the smokehouse. And was known as a bookie in those days. And the word came down, people came from Joliet, and they got a hold of Hans, and they asked him if there was any bookie operation around in Crete. He says, no, there's no bookie around here. If there'd be something going on, I'd know about it. But you'd see Hans in the back room, he'd making 3-horse show parlays. And a cigar butt sticking out of his mouth.
Well, they were delicious. He said, "Do you know what you was eating?" He says, "No, what was it?" "Rattlesnake." Well, he took off out of there and went between the buildings. Go ahead. But there was a lot of people gave him things, watermelon, fish, apples. I guess in their older times, he got quite a bit. Because I know my mother-in-law used to say that.
You know, Willard told me when I talked to him the other day that, speaking about watermelons, Hans used to be buddy-buddy on the north end of town with Joe White and with Pete Spados. And so they used to jive back and forth. And one day, Pete Spados says, "I'm going to get even with that fat cop." And so one day when Hans was gone, away from his car, Pete Spados came and put a great big watermelon in the back end of Hans's car. And Willard told me that that watermelon was so big it must have taken 3 guys to put it in Hans's car. And when they cut it open, it was just white inside. It hadn't matured yet. So today, if we want the police department, why we call up 911, and the operator answers, and they have a radio, and they contact the police, and they come to your house, or whatever the occasion is. But that wasn't the thing years ago. If you wanted the police, you called Hans's house, and Mrs. Clausen, why, she'd walk up to the corner here to see if she could find Hans and tell him what was wrong.
He was in the shanty. He was in the shanty up on the corner.
Now, there used to be a light on top of the traffic light. Yeah.
When I worked for Ollie Krebs, they had the restaurant over here. Anytime she'd want them, she used to have a signal there to go ahead and turn on the beer sign again at night. And that meant she had somebody in there that wanted to be escorted out of there. We had a fellow by the name of Puffy Rice. I don't know if some of them probably. He used to get a little over the hill and get on top of the bar stool and start singing "So Long Mary." That was enough for Holly, and she had Hans take him home. We call him Puffy.
I don't know if anybody ever had the experience of Hans grabbing you
by the leg.
He wouldn't walk for a few days after. He just had it just real strong. I might talk to Mrs. Willard Clausen. I used to play a lot of ball around town, and I played with Willard. And when we were like in grade school, we had just to pick up baseball, and we'd play around and stuff. And I had managed to get a game with Beecher. So they would play us, and we got to go down to Beecher to play. But we didn't have any transportation. But Mrs. Hans Clausen, and I think an old 35 Ford they had, most of all of us kids piled in that thing, and she took us to Beecher and stayed down for the whole game and brought us back again. So, I mean, she was quite a lady also. She was very, very thin. She was just the opposite of Hans.
Who's next? Mrs. Schumacher.
I don't have as many humorous stories as you do, but I do remember Hans because I lived in Chicago Heights, grew up in Chicago Heights, but I was up in Crete a lot, where my grandparents lived, where I live now, 1529 Main Street, and my Aunt Harriet Hughes is with me there. But I remember Hans and his motorcycle, for one thing. I always think of the two together. And then I always think of Hans as being so rotund. And he'd read the water meters. And when he'd come to my grandparents' home, the water meter was out in the front yard and down in a hole. And so poor Hans would have to get down, and he had a little difficulty getting down on his little fat tummy to look down in this hole and read the water meter. But he was very faithful. He always came and read the meter. But I always see him, you know, if I picture him with his motorcycle. I don't remember him in a car. But I do remember him very clearly as a child growing up.
After a while, why, Gus Krebs did get a slot machine at his place during the time that George Musman was mayor. And George Musman would tell Hans that tonight we're going to check the businesses for slot machines. So before the night came, why, Hans would go into Gus Krebs and say, we'll be in tonight to check on slot machines. So Krebs would put his slot machine away, and of course when he and Musman came in, why, there's nothing there. Jimmy, have you got another story to tell?
Oh, I'm not telling that.
Who's got another one?
I could tell you a little story that happened when we had a big grain elevator in Crete, right across from the park. My dad was connected with this somewhere along the line. They got a brainstorm one time. By the way, they kept about 30, 50-gallon drums of water on the way up in the attic of the grain elevator in case of fire. And they had a crane, like a big boom that went out with a hoist on it. These kids got together and they took a buggy apart, a horse buggy apart, and they took it up there with that crane and they put it all together on top of this grain elevator. And somebody got the bright idea to put a horse up there. They got a hold of this pony and they had a sling made and everything, I guess, and they got the thing about 20 feet off of the ground, and here comes Hans. He made them take the whole buggy down again and put it together back down on the ground.
While Hans was policeman, why, we had a number of fires in Crete, and one of the fires was Zoller's barn on Cass Street. Or the post office, you go, there's Opperman's house, and then across the alley was Zoller's barn. And one night that barn caught on fire, or one day, afternoon, whatever it was. And Hans came down the alley there with the hose cart to hook up the fire hose. And I believe it was Mrs. Meering that noticed a stranger looking around the corner of a building, and she told Hans about it. And so Hans chased him. And sure enough, this was the guy that set that barn afire. So Hans could have taken him to the lockup, and this guy tried to get away all the time, and when they got near the fire, Hans says, you better come with me or I'll throw you in the fire. Didn't have any more trouble with that guy. Next.
I don't have anything humorous, but when my husband, before he died, he took care of the little boy, and he used to take him uptown to Hans, and he tried to explain to him that Hans was his friend. If he was a good boy, Hans was his friend. And my husband said that Hans would take time to talk to this little kid and talk to him about, how you should be good. So that he did have a soft spot. And I also remember when Hans and Luella were married. A long time ago.
Yeah. Thank you. Hans was a good man, but he was law and order. If you were his friend, he was a good man. But if you were naughty, look out. Well, we've got, Tony's got another one. I can't remember them all.
The Butch Concrete, all the names, Mary, we were in Chanute Field together. Milford. Milford, yeah. Anyway, Butcher Concrete, whatever it was, you know. And every Sunday night, we'd get ready to go back to the Chanute Field. I'd pick Butch up at Ollie's, you know, Fred's place. So we'd leave there. I mean, she'd have a bundle of sandwiches and a six-pack and whatever. And once and I'd be outside talking. See, he'd always be around there, you know, come and we'd visit and talk about things that, you know, he'd picked, I said picked on me, like he might give me, you know, say I was speeding or something, and, you know, and I'm going to take you to Joel, yes, he said one time, in fact. Anyway, he said, I mean, he said, well, I'll tell you, George was the cause of some of that thing, George Grossman, you know. And this one Sunday afternoon, I asked him about this incident that happened. I was taking my sister and mother and the two sisters and mother to the show on a Sunday afternoon. So Hans and Moosman and somebody else was sitting on the stoop of the funeral home. And I'm going down the road, and I'm not speeding or anything. I think we get down to Spanos, and he corners us over there, and he comes out of there, oh, Hans' man. He says, I'm going to get action. He says, you speeding through town 60 miles an hour. I said, Hans, if you could drive this car 60 miles an hour, you can have it. Don't tell me what to do. Anyway, he was mad at me, you know, and I said, I wasn't speeding, Hans. Anyway, he walked off and said, I'm going to take you to Joliet next time it happens. Anyway, we got in and went on the show, and I asked him that night, you know, later, this is like 4 or 5 years later, I said, Hans, you remember that night, that afternoon when I was coming through town and you came and chased me? And I said, you know I wasn't speeding that night. No, he says, you weren't speeding. But Moosman said, there goes Renzi. Go get him. You know. He's mad at Moosman. Anyway, he came down there and he's letting all on me, you know. And he says, but he says, he still tells me what to do now. But I says, Hans, I mean, George, you're not my boss anymore. He says, don't tell me what to do anymore. But old Hans there, we'd sit, you know, and he said, now be careful to go back, you know, and it'd always be about 1 o'clock when we take off. But there was always a stop, but they got to know him better than ever, you know, just on those nights.
Tony, we Italians had a hard time growing up in this town. You were in here first, and we were second, I believe. There was only about 5 in town.
You become mayor of the town.
What?
I said, you became mayor of the town.
That's it, growing up.
Yeah.
That's different.
Well, we've got a number of pictures over here, and we invite you to come look at. If you don't have a copy of the Crete pictorial history, well, it's here too for examination. And I think there's some coffee over here for you folks to enjoy and have a little bit more fellowship and talk Hans Clausen amongst one another. Thank you all for coming.